They came looking for me, he said in a cramped, scratchy voice that was bereft of color and intonation. They came to an office where I was visiting friends, specifically looking for me. My friends said I wasn't there, but they hunted the building until they found me hiding behind boxes in a closet. His voice barely rustled the air around him. He couldn't really tell me who they were, but his crime was obvious, working for an organization that had connections to the Americans. For 21 days, he was held in a cellar and beaten. Nobody interrogated him for information. They simply beat him daily, on his feet, on his face, on his legs, on his back. They used metal poles, wooden sticks, wires, and fists. I tried to keep the images at bay, but all I could see was Mr. Amal's slight body lost in a sea of them, the pounding of bats and fists, the dull give of muscle and bone, screams muted, blood smeared. Knowing that there were hundreds, thousands of similar situations occurring with banality all over Iraq, all over the world, was one thing. But to look at a specific person and envision that human being within the melee of brutality was another thing altogether. Friends and colleagues from the WHO collected money for a ransom, and Mr. Amal was finally released, barely able to walk. He returned to Jordan as soon as he could physically mobilize himself. 3 months later, he came to the United States with the help of an American acquaintance who lived in a small town near Newark, New Jersey. There's so many metaphors for how people appear after a traumatic event, being shadows of their former selves or having a hollowness in their souls. They are only metaphors, but they seemed physically accurate descriptions of Mr. Amal. He actually looked like a shadow, so fragilely constructed that he might crumple in the wind. His carriage did indeed seem hollow, as though I could pass a hand through him, through a void of body and soul. Something had been eviscerated from him by these torturers. Mr. Amal started out living with his friend, then eventually got his own apartment nearby. But there were no Iraqis, no Arabs of any sort in that random New Jersey suburb. He found himself completely isolated and lonely, utterly baffled by American culture. "Nobody talks to you in America," he said, kneading the tips of his bony fingers. "They are polite and greet you, 'Hi, how are you?' but they don't actually want an answer. Nobody ever has a conversation. Nobody invites you to their home. In Baghdad, no matter how horrible things were with Saddam Hussein, with the war, people always invited you to their homes to share a meal. I've never seen the inside of a single home in America, not one." His fingers finally settled into his lap, limp with disappointment. To earn money, Mr. Amal tried to continue his IT work with his clients in Jordan. In order to coordinate the time difference, he had to stay up most of the night. Then he'd sleep most of the day, further isolating himself from the world. His only real contacts were the phone conversations he had with his family in Iraq. "Cell phones are the only things left in the entire country that work," he said with a bitter smile. He had no other medical conditions, and he had always been in excellent health up until the accident, which was how he referred to it. The only specific thing that was bothering him was restless legs when he tried to sleep in the mornings. I contemplated the shadow of a shadow trailed by its own bitter shadow of his sufferings. How could I help this man? I wasn't a psychiatrist, and even if I were, how was it possible to undo such pain? I gave him a prescription for gabapentin, the one medication we stocked in the Bellevue pharmacy that might help restless legs. Mr. Amal gave a formal bow before he shuffled out the door. The thin paper prescription grasped in his right hand seemed symbolic of the inadequacy of humanity. Was that all we could offer him? Just a few pills? I'll just give you his second visit. Muhammad Ali Amal returned for a second visit 2 months later. He greeted me politely and somberly as he had last time. "You cured my restless legs," he said, bowing slightly at the torso, "and I wish to thank you." Apparently the gabapentin had worked. A minor victory, but its joy quickly dissipated. "America is like a prison," he said, when I asked him how he was doing. His head angled downward, a chin against his chest. The bridge of his cheeks and his nose seemed to cast a penumbra of sorrow over his face. I almost wish I'd never started the asylum process. This was a statement I'd never heard before. Most clients of the SOT program were eager to pursue political asylum despite the frustrations involved. For them, for most, it was their holy grail, and they devoted their full resources to it. "You don't want political asylum?" I asked, incredulous. "It's not worth it," he replied, an undercurrent of anger gathering in his voice. "While the papers are in process, I cannot leave this country. At least in Jordan, I had friends, contacts, a community. But America, it's a prison that I can't escape." 24 hours after I watched Mr. Amal slip out of the door, I watched my cello teacher slip 2 photocopied sheets of paper from his bag and smooth them onto my music stand. The moment had finally arrived. After 3 years of sweating through etudes, scales, and simplified excerpts, it was time to start the Bach suites. The 6 unaccompanied cello suites by Bach are iconic in the repertoire. The first suite is the most famous, and it has been overplayed almost to the point of sentimental kitsch. But like other overplayed works, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, the underlying music is still spectacular no matter how often it's been dredged up for movies, TV commercials, and cell phone ringtones. To listen to it again may feel overly familiar, but to play it, well, that was another matter entirely. It was an opportunity, as a doctor musician friend of mine once put it, to touch the hem of that greatness. Monday afternoons with SOT patients were daunting. The breadth of brutality of human beings never ceased to astound. The energy, effort, and creativity invested in destroying the human body and spirit seemed limitless. What sort of response could I offer that was meaningful in the face of such overwhelming trauma? No matter what I said or did with my SOT patients, it always felt useless. It was a different feeling of uselessness than I felt, for example, with a patient dying of cancer. Disease, no matter how painful or humiliating or even self-inflicted, was something that occurred. Disease utilized intransitive verbs. But torture was transitive, done by somebody to somebody. Having a leg amputated because of complications from diabetes wasn't the same as having it hacked off by a machete. I felt as though I had something in my clinical repertoire to offer the diabetic who faced amputation of a foot. But I was at a complete loss for the Sierra Leonean whose arms had been macheted off. And it wasn't just because there were medical treatments for the diabetic to prevent the next amputation, but that diabetes was an entity separate from oneself and didn't have a face. Nobody did diabetes to anyone. The disease just occurred. Torture, on the other hand, had a face. Somebody, an actual person, did it. A human being. Raised the knife, poured the acid, heaved the boot, set the fire, inflicted the rape. And that, I think, was what made these patient encounters so unsettling, above and beyond contemplating the horror that the victim himself had endured. Somebody did this. Some member of our humanity. And whether I liked it or not, I was part of that same humanity. The sheet music of the first Bach suite appeared straightforward. 2 pages of evenly spaced notes in the key of G. No intricate timing, no double sharps, no key changes, no clef shifts, no fancy ornamentation. But as anyone who has ever tussled with Bach knows, that simplicity is ruthlessly deceptive. 1 measure at a time, my teacher instructs me. It needs to be completely memorized. Expect to put in at least a year on this. This was said without irony. And 3 years later, I'm still on that same suite. Week after week, month after month, I tiptoed gingerly through the music. I found myself focusing ever more narrowly on a single page, a single line, a single measure, even a single note. Temperamentally, this was the exact opposite of the din of meaningless minutiae that clattered the halls of the hospital. All efforts here needed to be focused on struggling to achieve precisely the right note. But then, there was a step even beyond that. The note didn't merely have to be right. It also had to be beautiful. Beauty gets short shrift in medicine. Beauty is inherently unpragmatic. It doesn't enhance efficiency, increase productivity, earn a grant, or cure a patient. But it feels necessary. When I'd survived a measure and could play several notes in sequence, the beauty was astounding. The type of beauty that really did take the breath away. I sometimes feel as though I have to stack up Bach against Mugabe, Hussein, bin Laden, and all the random dictators who litter the globe. There has to be a counterbalance in this world, a counterbalance that is both metaphorical and actual. To live in this world, to accept that such cruelty is a reality, I had to know that beauty was an equal reality. Even if some humans seem to exist solely to offer pain and destruction, there were others who existed only to create beauty. The chance to feel the hem of that greatness, the hem of that beauty, graze the cheek, even fleetingly, was sometimes the only thing that kept the last straw at bay. Thank you very much.